Welcome to our next installment of 20-Minute Tuesdays here from the Innovation and Learning Center at the University of South Alabama. My name is David Williams, and I'd like to welcome you to this Facebook Live event. Today, we're happy to welcome Allison Morrow, an instructor in our Department of English, and she's going to talk about the pedagogy and technology behind peer review. As we watch this video and as we are prepared to take your comments live, please use the text box underneath this video to ask your questions, and Allison will be sure to get to all of them. Allison?
Thanks, David. Today, I'm going to be talking through some peer review theories, to talk through some of the basics of how peer review should operate in your classrooms, and talk about a practical use of a technology that can help enhance your peer review practices within your classrooms. So when we talk about peer review, usually we think about it from a scholarly perspective, where people go in from particular disciplines and they ultimately evaluate writing that is based on the quality of its work within the field of that discipline. And we also evaluate it for its effectiveness in that discipline. We don't usually carry those understandings of peer review over into the classroom, unfortunately. We usually think of peer review for our classrooms as being merely an editing services, which is kind of a detriment. Because not only do we want our students to be able to turn in documents that are well edited, well proofread, and well thought through, we also want them to be carefully thinking about the different disciplinary practices that are in place. Another kind of factor that comes into play with peer review is that oftentimes students come to peer review with negative perceptions about the peer review process. One of those negative perceptions is, well, my peer review partner really doesn't know about this subject area, so how can they possibly comment on that subject area? And another is that maybe my peer review partner doesn't really care. They're not going to give me the feedback that I need. I think for a while, as an instructor, I naively thought that you should go into a classroom assuming that your students already know what good peer review practices are. And one of the things that you can do to help enhance the peer review practices that your students are doing is to give them some sort of lecture, some sort of instructional guidance to more or less help them to be able to understand how to provide good peer review and how to do it effectively. This obviously has connotations throughout their learning degrees, not just in giving them good peer review content at this moment in time, but giving them good strategies to critique other people's work in the future and to understand how a subject or a discipline values writing and how they can get better at it in the future as well. So when conducting peer reviews, instructors should clearly demonstrate the process of peer review to their students by using some sort of form of lecture or some form of in-class activity. In my own personal first-year composition classes, I've started by actually taking a day to explain peer review and to have them read a short article by Richard Straub. And the article is called Really Responding to Other Students' Writing. And it really lays out the different kinds of skills that students need to be able to know when they go into peer review. It tells them things like how you should look at yourself as a peer review responder. You're obviously not the professor, so you don't sound like the professor when you comment to other students. You have a little bit of empathy. You temper your criticisms. You give them what they need to be successful in revising their paper. Another key point of Straub's article is emphasizing the fact that you are not the person who is changing the paper. So if you're the peer review commenter, you should be the person who is merely providing suggestions on how the paper could be better or how it could best fit that audience's purposes. So one thing that you can do in an activity that I engage in is I have my students read this article before coming into class, and I assign them different pieces of advice and ask them to explain it to the class and what that practically means to them. This gets them in the mode of understanding what peer review looks like and how to best comment with it using those different strategies. Something else that I do is I also try to emphasize those disciplinary specific conventions that writing needs to follow. Now, this may not be fairly obvious to your students. And I know in first year composition, we want our students to be able to transfer their writing related knowledge to a variety of different contexts. But one thing that you can do if you're not a writing instructor per se, or you teach writing in another discipline, is that you can very simply just tell them what the conventions of that discipline are. I know personally when I was an English major and I went into a physical science class where I had to write a lab report for the first time, it was a total earth-shattering experience because it's a different writing style. Lab reports require a specific structure. They require an introduction with a hypothesis. They require a methodology section, and they require a conclusion. And all of those kinds of things have to be done in a particular order. And for me as an English major, I didn't know this, and I needed someone to be able to tell me this. So a good thing that you can do to enhance peer review is to actually mention to them what those disciplinary concerns are. So that's one way that you can make peer review, even in other disciplinary classes, to be most effective. So the last thing that I would recommend, other than providing them with an assignment sheet that reminds them of those peer review requirements, is to use Google Docs. Now, this is a tool that I have been using actually to make my grading practices go much smoother. And something that I found in my classes is that my students who use Google Docs and take my feedback and their peer reviewers' feedback seriously, their revision work is of extreme significance. What I'm going to do now is walk through some of the features and talk about how using Google Docs in peer review could enhance that process and make it go a little bit better. So one element of Google Docs is the suggesting mode feature. And the suggesting mode feature is basically like your editing tool. The editing tool is there to mark grammar errors, maybe to mark typos, or to mark sentences that may not be quite structured effectively. So you can have them use this as an edit tool, but I actually encourage my students to use it very sparingly, because the point of peer review is to make sure that the documents are actually holistically revised and not just selectively. You want them to pay attention to the big picture concerns like content, organization, and if you tell them to prioritize that in their comments, they spend less of their time trying to mark all of those things together. So one thing to think about in terms of putting together feedback is to tell them it's not your job to mark every single error that is on the page. It's actually your job just to tell them, hey, this doesn't quite match up to your assignment sheet. Or maybe you should consider adding more evidence to this particular point. So you can show them the suggesting mode, but I would also recommend that you tell them to focus more on commenting on the document. Another cool tool that Google Docs uses is the revision history. And this is actually quite a fascinating tool. They give you the option more or less to look back on the document and to see how many times it's been revised and what changes have been made to it. So if a student, after their peer review, wants to evaluate their feedback and to go back and look into it, they can look through those particular realms and to be able to see that kind of thing happening. So if you use Google Docs for your grading practices and for peer review, this could get students more invested in their revision practices as well. Another feature that Google Docs has is chat and tagging. And this is a really cool feature that I use to ask my students to reach out for help in between peer review or in between writing practices. But this could be a way to extend peer review outside the classroom. Let's say they get peer review feedback that they're confused about. Well, they can continue that conversation in the comments thread of their particular document. They can tag their peer review partner, ask them for advice, and that leaves them a great way to continue that process much afterward. And again, we don't want our students to write our papers at the very last minute or to even revise them at the last minute. We want them to do this consistently and to do it as effectively as possible. So the biggest important feature is the commenting feature. And before I show you how that can more or less work, I want to talk about ways that you can practically use this by using Straub's model of being able to comment effectively and using his theoretical lens. With Straub's model, he emphasizes the point that you should comment throughout the draft on those big picture concerns. He places less emphasis on marking all those errors that you see on the page because that can be quite intimidating to attack for a student. I mean, most of us have probably seen a red pen paper marked all over with comments, and that can be quite intimidating for a student. So instead, encourage your students to make comments on those big picture concerns out to the side of their document. Something that I do is I create a mini assignment sheet for peer review that recaps some of the big picture concerns of the assignment sheet that I'm looking for. It reminds them of the elements that have to be there in their paper so that the students who are peer reviewing their document can see that and make comments to those regards, to make sure that students are actually following the assignment sheet, to make sure that they're organizing their content well. So on the screen now is an example of some of the great commenting that I've seen after engaging this model in my own classroom. And what you should know is that all of these comments are not talking about the grammar or the structure of the paper. What they're asking their peer reviewer to do is to dive a little deeper, to get to the point of their essay and to create meaning. After all, the point of writing is to shape meaning. If we want our students to value writing, to actually know what the process is, and to understand that writing is an epistemic process, one that constantly reshapes meaning, then teaching them that peer review is also an epistemic process where we are working together to shape meaning together, that helps them to value the peer review process and helps them to actually engage with it as well.
This has been so helpful and so good. Thank you to all of you that are commenting and showing your appreciation for what Allison has taught us so far. Allison, I have one question that I want to ask you, because you teach English, you teach primarily composition classes here at the university, but you're using Google technology. So you're teaching technology in the context of a writing class. So talk to us a little bit about what your approach has been and what some of the students' impressions have been as you've been delivering technology instruction as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a lot of different cases, what you may find is that the students that you work with, they probably don't have as much experience with technology as you might actually think that they do. I mean, oftentimes we find that our students may struggle with working our Sakai sites or struggling with email. And so what I do to try to help students ease into that process is I've created YouTube tutorials, and on those YouTube tutorials, I've actually screencasted how to walk through creating a folder, how to use the Google Doc, and for me, that's cut down on instructional time in the classroom that I could spend in other kind of circumstances, like teaching content that's related to writing. And so they get that little extra tool that they can use outside of the classroom, and I find that to be particularly
So are you able to use those videos from semester to semester?
Yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, you've created a reusable tool there that is not only saving you time now, but it's saving you time in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that I've done actually is I tried to make them as basic as possible so that I could send them to other instructors so that they can see it from the perspective of a South student. So I go through it and model how they should do it if they're in any kind of section, whether that's composition or a lit section, whoever happens to be in that class.
So you bring up a good point here about shareable resources. So we have a bit.ly link that's on your screen. We'll put it in the comment box as well. So Allison, tell us, if someone out in our audience goes to this link, what are they going to get?
So they'll get access to the article that I referenced during the presentation. They'll also get a copy of the assignment sheet that I create with my peer review that I more or less adapt to every writing assignment that I have. And I'm also going to go in and include the screenshot tutorials for those of you who needed it.
Good.
I see that Karen has already asked for that. And I realized I didn't sneak that one in there. The other thing is that I have a link to an article that I wrote reviewing Google Docs as the technology as a grading tool. And I go through some of the pros and cons of using it as a grading tool, and you can see some of my struggles so that maybe you don't have the same struggles as well.
Well, I think as big a point as anything that you've made so far is we have to teach our students to write, but we need to teach our students how to review their work because that is such a transferable skill. So I think that's a really helpful thing for our instructors and our faculty to access here, again, that bit.ly. And we'll put that up a couple more times before the show is over.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important. Another point that you made is that we can't necessarily assume tech skills. So you're kind of leveling the playing field there. And I love the idea of giving video, kind of that flipped model, giving some technology instruction so that you save that precious class time. Why don't we go to the computer here and let you show our live audience some of the nuances of the types of comments to do a little follow-up. So why don't you pull this up here? I think you've got a paper that you've already pulled up. And so why don't you walk our audience through some of the things that you were wanted to elaborate on.
Sure thing. So I actually used an assignment that I've just recently done in a course to kind of give you a model from which to work from. So one of the big things that I mentioned in the presentation was to use the commenting feature as kind of your basis for how you will run the project. So what you can do to comment on a piece of text is you can highlight a piece of text, like I'm doing now, right click it and click comment. And then you can add whatever comment you think would be appropriate to that particular context. So I'm just going to write comment here just for the sake of time.
Yeah, sure.
And hit comment. So the conversation doesn't have to just stop there. You can actually continue the conversation out further. So for those of you who are curious about how to continue the conversation out further, what you would do is you would go in and hit reply and you would tag an email address in there. So for your peer review partner, this could be your peer review partner. It also could be your professor that you can tag, and you will tag them, and what it will do is it will generate an email and it will send it to you so that you know someone is reaching out and requesting for your help. So I just tagged my student email so that you can at least see what it would look like. And then you can continue that as a big giant thread.
Okay, so let's talk about the situations where you as the instructor are the peer review partner. You probably see where I'm going here.
Yes.
So I've got a class of 20, 25, 30 students. They're all adding me there and tagging me. So I'm going to get lots of emails from lots of Google Docs. So what's been your experience, and how can we ease that fear, perhaps, of our faculty that might be watching?
So yes, you do get a lot of email, and it's all about the ways that you can best manage that and organize that. Personally, I like having those emails there because it's a useful tool to me to navigate and to keep track of who's actually revising within a particular class or a particular course. And so something that I do is I like to look to see what they're actually working on, what they're revising, and keep monitoring it. So I like the emails to keep flowing in. But for someone who may be a little bit intimidated by looking at all those emails and trying to manage them in your email box, something that you may want to do is just create a folder where all of those can go. And you can check them maybe daily, periodically, to see if students are reaching out and asking for help.
I think that's a really, really important point that you make there, Allison, is that you're going to get notifications and emails, but what does that mean? That means that our students are reviewing and working. So I think it's just not letting the technology, and sometimes we hear people say that Google Drive can get cluttered, because this is going to require lots of Google documents, at least one for every student in situations where you're the peer review partner. So I think and I want to hear from you, just having an organized system, the folders in the email, I think, is a good idea. What has been your experience of just having to stay organized with it?
So what I have done is a variety of different things to stay organized. And one of those things is that I actually have students share with me their folders at the beginning of the semester. And they share it with me. They put all their documents in one place. And as far as me trying to access that for comments and feedback, what I'll do is I'll just search my Google Drive folder, find their folder, and then I'm able to access all of what they have. I've heard of people using other methods, but it kind of goes back to what you prefer to organize your folders and keeping all of that in track.
A super great example of technology, then teaching technology being used to support a very sound instructional technique. The research is clear on peer assessment, and I love how you've shared today how to do it. Once again, Allison, tell our audience at the bit.ly that's up on the screen, what will they get if they click on this link? What sort of resources will be there? So
you'll have access to the article that I've written on using Google Docs as a grading practices. You'll get a copy of Straub's article that walks through the model of peer review. I've also I forgot to include that I've concluded an activity that you can use for students to discuss different portions of the activity if you need something smaller to manage in class. And I've also I will also include the screenshot tutorials that I've already made, so that if you want to use them, feel free to do so. Perfect. Thank you so much again, Allison. Please continue to put your questions and comments in the text box. Allison and other members of the ILC staff will monitor this so we can continue the conversation about peer review. Allison, thank you so much for coming here to this 20-Minute Tuesday. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching this 20-Minute Tuesday Facebook Live broadcast from the University of South Alabama Innovation and Learning Center. We'll see you next month.